Hello and welcome to my understairs cupboard. It will all become clear. Subsequently, this cupboard's been filled with more inverters and I've kind of developed a solar obsession. Anyway, so some of you may have seen a video on how I've upgraded my solar down the bottom of the garden. And now it is watertight and I've got a lot more power there. But how did it all get there? What did I install behind the scenes? My inverter, my batteries, how did I do it? That is what this video is about. And disclaimer, this video is not a how-to guide. Basically, don't follow anything that I've done because there may have been something I've done wrong that's not up to standard. And I don't want you guys following that and being responsible for it. But hopefully everything is okay. There's a few things which I've learned along the way, and there's a few things I'd do differently next time. So follow me, maybe it will be entertaining for you, or maybe it'll be useful for you with your own DIY setup. First off, why am I in the understairs cupboard? Well, I think this is the start of the journey, or maybe my solar journey starts here, down the garden, in our only spot of shade, because I built this solar pergola. I think that was just an excuse to play with solar panels. Or maybe my journey started here on a hot summer's day when the sun is out and I'm realising all of that solar radiation that I'm not making money out of. So a few years back, the consumer unit is in this cupboard and I needed a socket for a Dyson. We'd moved into the place and we didn't want the Dyson just on the wall in the kitchen. This cupboard had no electric in it other than the consumer unit and intake feed. So a circuit was put in that provided sockets and lights. There's an extension that comes off this, provides the Dyson. That got me thinking about all the things that could be connected off this. And you started to see prices rising perhaps. And maybe the journey started with Facebook. I started scrolling through and seeing adverts for cheap old solar panels. And it got me thinking, it got me doing my research and looking at some videos, and that's what brings us to today. There were some big choices to make. What inverter do I go for? What battery system? Do I go for lead acid? Do I buy old massive lead acid batteries and use those? Much cheaper. Do I go for lithium iron phosphate? Do I build my own lithium packs again? In the past, I've built lithium packs out of 18650s. And I don't think that that's for most people. I've spot welded them, I've used little fuse wire. It's a lot of work, it's very time consuming, and one of the biggest challenges is finding a good source of cheap batteries. I got lucky once with some. I must have had 300 cells for about 20 quid and they had plenty of life in them. Anyway, that wasn't enough for what I needed here. So I ended up going directly to Alibaba and ordering from a supplier there. Prices have come down so much in the meantime and you kind of think, oh, if I'd waited another couple of years. Anyway, let's have a look at what I installed over here. I've got 8 cells that are 280 amp hour. They're EVE 280 amp hour cells and they're all obviously 3.2 nominal voltage, maximum 3.65, which gives me about 29 volts maximum. I then added a JKBMS. Fantastic BMS in my view. This BMS has way more input, so you could have a pack that is a lot bigger, maybe in the future. But it does a fantastic job. It's got Bluetooth, it's got its own app. I'm just really impressed with this BMS. I can't remember what it's rated at. I will look it up and probably pop that on the screen. The casing for this battery, I ended up 3D printing. I do 3D printing as well. There's a guy on the internet who made a battery case that was fantastic. I was fairly new to printing, so I probably made some mistakes with that. These batteries need to be compressed, so they all need to be pulled together in order for you to get the most life out of them. So I compressed them, but in the process of compressing them, some of the 3D prints I basically needed to print it with more infill to make them stronger, so they cracked a bit. The result being I've ended up with a ratchet strap on this, and it's been hidden under here with this ratchet strap absolutely fine all this time. I planned this whole battery to be hidden right at the bottom of the stairs in an area which you just don't use anyway. Some of the guidance notes about installing battery systems for electricians in the UK state that they shouldn't be installed in lofts, and that it's not advisable to install them under stairs as well because it is an access route in case of fire. I do understand that, and I think that's probably a good idea, but it's already in now, it's working, and lithium iron phosphate is safe as far as batteries go.
I haven't been this embarrassed since I was a rookie firefighter. Sorry, first day, still learning.
It's a little bit like Lego how these are made up. They've got little Lego slots to secure these covers on the top. They have little channels to take all your wires down, and I did have to make up my own bus bar links. The ones that came with the kit weren't designed to have these spaces in, so I got a length of copper bar off the internet and I nickel plated it, which was an interesting experience. I wanted to have a play. Nickel plating means that it's not going to tarnish the copper over time. The battery then feeds to a fuse through some chunky 50mm cable. I brought my cables ready-made because there's no chance that I was going to be terminating these massive cables. I would have needed to buy a pretty decent sized crimper. There is a fuse on the negative side and an isolator on the positive side, and then that feeds into my inverter. I'll bring you a little closer for that fuse. I've got a story about that. My fuse lasted just fine for about 2 years, and then I came down one morning and the internet was off and the fridge was off and my home server was off. These are the things that it powers. I will get into that a little bit further later. But it turned out that the fuse had melted. I don't know if it was a bad connection or what, but because I'd 3D printed a case, I struggled to find a case that could fit the fuse that I had at the time, so I 3D printed one. That all melted into a great big mass, so I upgraded that fuse. Same amps, I believe it's 100 amp, but it's in a nice new case. And since then, I've not had any issues, but yeah, a little bit of a worry. My DC cabling from my battery heads into my isolator, and then we head up into the inverter. This sticker is my friends thinking it was funny at the time to wind me up about how this cupboard was just full of electrical gear. Not the biggest understairs cupboard, but in the meantime, since I've installed this, I've ended up with a massive Give Energy inverter and battery. This is a Raspberry Pi here, and it runs something called Solar Assistant. And Solar Assistant basically reads the inverter and the battery and then allows me to export that to Home Assistant. The inverter just quite simply treats this as if it's a lead acid battery, in the sense of it just charges it to a certain voltage, but the Raspberry Pi is able to do more and supply more information to me. It's quite a jumbled mess under here, but if we look at the solar comes in here and it then feeds into this isolator, which then feeds into my inverter. So we got my battery coming in, my solar coming in. I then have the power coming out to this mini little consumer unit. So this inverter is rated for 4,000 watts, okay? But that is a lot to be pulling from the battery, and my solar array isn't anywhere near this. So I planned on basically supplying this inverter with just a constant slow level of load. So I've put the first floor lights for the house, the fridge freezer, and there's a couple of sockets there which I generally plug my laptop into, and my office. So all of these things are not particularly heavy demand devices or circuits, So they just supply a constant demand. I do sometimes charge up our hybrid battery on our car from this circuit as well, and that does have its issue. This inverter is an MPP Solar inverter. It's a dual output inverter, meaning it has two outputs and you can control the second circuit for non-essential items. Effectively, when the battery reaches this level, cut those things off. But I didn't want it for that. I wanted it because it's the highest power 24 volt system that I could find. If I could go back in time, and this is one of the biggest things I would change, I would install a 48 volt system. The reason I didn't, because it would double my battery cost. I would need 16 cells instead. Okay, I could have had smaller cells, I could have gone for cheaper, smaller cells, and that might have been my best option. But 24 volt really limits your output. You end up needing massive chunky cabling to feed the inverter. As I said, I'm using 50mm cables here, which is pretty big to be honest. But if you go 48 volts, it's less battery pulling in terms of current, and it helps avoid things getting hot. This inverter, if I choose to plug the car in and I'm only pulling about 2000 watts, this inverter gets up to about 49 degrees and then just shuts off from temperature. It gets too hot. Not an issue in the winter at all, but it's not in the winter when I have solar. It's in the summer when I've got solar, so I have to be careful with how much I load this up when it gets hot. And that is one of the problems with this little cupboard. Because I've installed my off-grid setup and I also have this massive stonking inverter installed by a company, and that's a whole nother story. It means that it gets hot in here in the summer, so I have tried to negate that by installing a small fan on the cupboard. This fan, I think it looks quite pretty, 3D printed. It has quite a low RPM fan, so it's not too noisy. I do want to put a slightly more powerful fan on there to pull out more heat in the middle of summer. It does look a jumbled mess of cables in this cupboard, and I apologise for that. There does need to be some routing management. There are different cables doing different things here. There's also a spare bunch of breakers for different reasons, which I won't get into in this video. But this, we've talked about how the power comes in from the battery. The big battery hidden down there. Fantastic use of that space down the bottom. It wasn't going to be doing anything else. I think we might have tried to store paint pots down there. Anyway, so we got our battery power coming in. We've got our solar power coming in. We've got power coming out to this mini consumer unit, which feeds those extra couple of circuits. But also I have power coming into the inverter from the grid if I need it. So in the winter I end up on a tariff where it's cheap at night, and because there isn't so much solar, I generally charge the batteries to 100% or 90% overnight in that cheap period. That then gives me more battery storage to work with and allows me to use my energy at the cheapest rate. So not only do I gain solar power in the summer, which saves me money on my electric, I'm also able to use that battery storage. And because we have a plug-in hybrid car, we're able to get ourselves on a nice cheap tariff for overnight rates. That is most of it in this cupboard. As I say, absolute mess. There is so much jumbled here, and over time I will end up changing it. There are another few considerations, but I'm going to need to show you that outside, I think. Let's go. Another consideration to installing off-grid solar is an earth rod. You need an earth rod to make your installation safe. You could think, oh no, it's absolutely fine, I'll just connect to the grid. I wouldn't have done that. But that then doesn't comply. You're then using the grid, which means if there was a fault and somebody was working on it, there could be dangers for them. You need an earth rod because in the case of a fault, you are then protected. So let's open it up, I'll show you what's in there. So in here we have our earth cable, which is connected up to 2 rods that are punched into the ground. I did have a look at some surveys to find out where my electric supply comes in before I did this, because I was worried that, knowing my luck, I might punch through something. But there we have it. That is our earth rods. There's 2 earth rods in there. These earth rods feed up the wall and in through this cable, which then feeds in through the wall and back to that inverter. Well, there we have it. Well, there we have it. A fitting place to end this video underneath the solar pergola itself. So I've largely avoided putting this video out because of that understairs cupboard being a little bit of a mess and jumbled wires. A little bit fearful of the comments, but come on, throw me some positive comments. What are my takeaways from this setup? Well, if I was going to do it again, I would definitely go for a 48 volt system. I could have done that by buying individual cells, but smaller cells, so that would have not really cost that much more, and ultimately smaller cells but twice the amount, 16 of those cells, and I probably wouldn't have ended up spending too much more. As I mentioned before, my BMS would have been fine. Cupboard, basically I was concerned with the packaging in that cupboard as well as the cost, but if I was going to do it again, I would go with a 48 volt system. I'm glad I avoided lead acid batteries. They can seem appealing with their price, but they only have limited cycles. I was really intrigued with these lithium iron phosphate batteries with their claimed 5,000 or 8,000 cycles, so it'd be good to see how they perform over time. The inverter itself can be a tiny bit annoying with its fans, and I may have gone for one that doesn't have fans. It also is annoying that it gets to that temperature of 49 degrees, 50 degrees, and then decides to shut off to protect itself, and that is partly down to where I've placed it in that cupboard. So if you've got any ideas with that, then please let me know in the comments. It could be quite useful. Ultimately, I think I'm going to end up upgrading this off-grid system with an on-grid system with a much bigger inverter on the outside wall, but we shall see on that one. How has the system been performing? Well, in total, I now have about 7 kilowatts of solar panels. I've got my 3.2 here and about 4 on the house. The house has an east-west array and the pergola is south-facing. So together, last year, with my old solar panels on there, which didn't do very well in the cloudy conditions, I got about 300 kilowatt hours in the April. This year in April I got about 540 kilowatt hours, so that's quite a step up with these panels. May has been terrible for sunny days. We get patches of sun, we just haven't had real good sunny days. Last Sunday was our first proper sunny day with no clouds all through the day, and I managed to achieve just under, so close to 40 kilowatts, 39.3. My previous record last year, even through June, July, was 30 kilowatt hours. So we have seen an improvement there, and with June, July to come, I'm expecting even more in a day, even more solar power gained in a day. So I'm very happy that I upgraded it, and I'm very happy I built this off-grid system. It kind of got me started, and if I can help one or two to avoid some of the mistakes that I made, or to maybe do things different, you always try to set yourself a budget, don't you, when you do these projects, and not spend too much. And that was largely why I avoided the 48 volt system and went for the 24. But as I said, chunky cables. What would I do now in terms of building a battery? If I was to do this again, I would probably buy a ready-made pack. I think it's Pylon Tech do their rack mounted systems, so I'd probably buy some of their 48 volt batteries, or I would use a company like Fogstar, who have come out with a load of their own battery systems. You can buy an individual battery, or you can buy it in rack form as well. This wasn't really available the same over the last couple of years from Fogstar, but I've heard good results from their products, so that's probably what I'd go with. Either way, if you decided to move or something like that, or wanted to upgrade, then you can do that with those kits. If you can think of anything that might help me with this setup, then please let me know in the comments. We haven't even talked about how I ran the cabling from this solar pergola all the way up to the house. Basically, when I built my office next door, I dug a channel for some armoured cable, and while I was there I put some extra ducts in. And if you ever need to dig a trench, always put some extra ducts in. They will always come in handy in the future. Well, there we have it. If you've done your own off-grid solar setup, then please let me know in the comments what's worked well for you, and let me know what your setup is. It's always good to hear what other people are doing and how they're going about doing it. Until next time, Battery Man out. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. Please like and subscribe. I know it's all boring when people say that, but it really does make a difference. Anyway, that's me now. Battery Man out. Mustache.